Hi, I'm Aura, and I have some people around supporting me, and I'm going to make a video that I'm pretty nervous about. This is going to get into a topic that people in the community can get pretty heated about. We've seen a lot of people have really strong positions on this. We would love if you would listen to like the whole thing and not like fill in gaps essentially, or like make assumptions that we are saying things that we don't actually say in the video. But generally we have a boundary where this is always true, but as a reminder for this type of video, it's not okay to be aggressive or hateful in our comments or our community in general, even if you strongly disagree. It's okay if you don't agree with us on things, but basic respect needs to still be there, and we will moderate accordingly. So why am I making this video even though I'm so nervous about it? Essentially, it boils down to, I think community and acceptance are really important, and I don't think hate is useful or productive. And it's tied into my position on fake claiming generally, which is that it is very harmful, and that there isn't a way to do it that isn't harmful, and that it's not the place of anyone who isn't a professional to figure out if someone else is faking something, and there isn't a way for you to know. Last disclaimer thing before I really get into it is I'm not an expert. Our system is not an expert on anything, arguably not even our own experience because of how amnesia and everything works. We are still the authority essentially on our own experience, of course, but we're not an expert on anything, and we're not trying to be. So this is coming from a place of beliefs and concerns that we have and care about, and not coming from a place of trying to prove or disprove anything, basically. And I only know my experiences, not yours, which is part of where this whole thing is coming from in the first place. So we believe very strongly that it's important to respect people whether or not you understand or agree with them in general. You don't have to respect things they do or say necessarily. There are certainly behaviors that don't deserve to be respected, but I believe people in general deserve the most basic level of respect, and I think hate is clearly outside of that boundary. And there is a category of drawing a hard line essentially to exclude certain groups of people that we see as fake claiming and don't see it being discussed as fake claiming, basically. So now that I've done all of that setup essentially without actually saying what I'm talking about, let me say what I'm talking about. We believe that taking a hard stance, especially publicly, on like declaring that non-traumagenic system origins can't be real is a form of fake claiming. So I'm going to get into why I see it that way, and then into generally when it comes to this and other forms of fake claiming, why we think it's so harmful. So to start, symptoms and experiences generally tend to have more than one possible cause, just in general. And there are things that have way more than other things, like just about anything can cause a headache, just about anything can cause like some level of fatigue. Like there are things that are very common symptoms of a lot of things, but it's so common for things to have more than one possible cause. And the only known cause of something isn't the same thing as the only possible cause of something. So even if there isn't research that establishes another cause of something, that doesn't mean there isn't one. It might just mean we don't know about it yet. And that's essentially what that whole field of researching into psychology is about. And every time we update the DSM, etc., it's because we learned new things about those disorders or are categorizing them in a slightly different way, and we understand them better and better over time. And there was a time with, I guess, every disorder before we knew that it existed or how it worked. And there are a lot of things that we still don't know everything about how it works. The brain generally is one of those things that it's very complicated and we don't know everything about how it works. There are also, generally speaking, in the world, rarely absolutes that are always true, unless it's part of a definition of something, in which case we decide that that's always true because we are defining it that way, and we could define it differently if we if we learn more about something and determine that that makes more sense. So another general related thing is that science generally, like the scientific method, doesn't ignore data that doesn't match a known phenomenon. So if we understand something about how something works, but something else that we see doesn't fit that, and we don't have an explanation for it yet, it doesn't, like, science, when done how it's supposed to be done, the scientific method generally isn't meant to just ignore those things. It's meant to research them and try to learn whatever it is that we don't know yet that explains that thing. So generally saying that because something isn't explained yet or doesn't fit the way we currently understand that type of thing, that means it's not real, just isn't how research generally works. Also, generally speaking, stigma has an effect of slowing down research. So heavily stigmatizing and invalidating experiences that are not currently researched enough is detrimental to that research. But DID was a real experience that people had before science understood it and defined it. And again, definitions and criteria of disorders can change as we learn more about them and understand them better. Like, the research obviously supports the way we define disorders, but people do ultimately decide how they are describing that collection of symptoms and what criteria are essential or the most common experiences attached to that collection of symptoms. And that can change. An example of that, for instance, would be autism spectrum disorder being redefined as a spectrum disorder instead of several distinct disorders as it was before then. other experiences that don't fit the criteria for DID could also be determined to be a totally separate disorder with some overlapping symptoms. There can be overlapping symptoms between all kinds of disorders. Or it could even be a non-disordered version of overlapping experiences. There are a lot of cases where there are experiences that don't meet the criteria to be a disorder, but that doesn't mean people aren't having that experience. So, like, you can have anxiety without meeting the definition of an anxiety disorder. That doesn't mean you're not anxious. And like I said earlier, brains are really complicated, and I can think of a lot of factors that would make sense to me to affect system development, like other mental illnesses being present, like developmental differences, like developmental disorders, or other things like that, that, for instance, affect at what point a child might have their ego states integrate into like a single personality or identity comes to mind. We already know there's some variation in that. That's why the range that's commonly listed of when that happens is a range of years and not it happens on January 17th when you're 6 or whatever. Like, we already know there's some variation, and it would make sense to me that there could be situations that would like make it vary more than that. I also want to address the idea that it's somehow disrespecting our experiences as traumagenic systems if someone else has different but overlapping experiences. So, like, let's say someone talks about having a system, but it's a totally positive experience for them. It's helpful, it's a coping strategy. They have no negative experiences at all with it. It's only useful to them. That doesn't minimize how hard it is for you. Someone else having an experience that you have because of trauma doesn't mean your trauma wasn't real, doesn't mean your trauma wasn't horrible. In the same way as, like, if I have a headache because I'm a little dehydrated or something, and you have a headache or intense head pain of some kind because of, like, a physical trauma, like an accident of some kind or whatever, an injury, that doesn't, like, me having a headache for, like, a smaller, milder reason doesn't invalidate or minimize in any way the reason you have a headache. Charlie has decided she's done being in my lap for now. But I think it's really important to distinguish that someone talking about having similar experiences to you for positive or mildly negative or neutral or whatever reasons isn't inherently making fun of you or your trauma or how hard it is for you or any of those things. Now, if someone actually is directly making fun of you, of course, that's disrespectful and bad, but I don't think other people just having different experiences is inherently bad. I almost kind of think of it like if it's a positive coping skill like that it's almost like they're already at the stage of functional multiplicity, that it kind of functions like that, of it's a coping skill, but they've, like, it'd be similar to if we were at the stage of having worked through the things about it that are disabling. Because there are ways where DID is a coping skill already. But essentially, if a coping skill is functional for you and it isn't hurting anyone, that's awesome. And I do want to make very clear, if it's not disabling, it shouldn't be diagnosed as DID or OSDD, or I think just about any other established disorder, because that's part of the current definition is that it has to have a clinically significant negative impact on your life. But just because something is a disorder doesn't mean someone isn't experiencing it. And like, of course, especially if it's positive, but even negative things that we don't currently have a definition for or that don't meet the standard of a disorder are still real. People are still anxious even if they don't have an anxiety disorder. People are still sad even if they don't meet the definition of depression, etc. I also think it's really important to acknowledge that excluding people for no trauma or for not enough trauma overlap a lot, and it raises the only soldiers can have PTSD red flag for me, of if we're excluding people for not having bad enough experiences. That has been done a lot of times in ways that are now clearly problematic. There are lots of ways to develop PTSD. I also think it can cause a lot of harm to insist that someone has repressed trauma. So if essentially you're giving if you're describing it as a dichotomy of you're either like faking or wrong in some way, or you have trauma you don't know about, telling people to essentially go looking for trauma they don't remember can be very harmful, whether or not they have repressed trauma. If they do, the amnesia is there for a reason, and they likely aren't ready to deal with that. And people can end up breaking down amnesia barriers like that before they're ready, and it can be very disruptive. And if they don't have repressed trauma, it could be something that makes them paranoid or waste a bunch of time in therapy or on their own or both looking for trauma that isn't there because they think they must have it in order to be having the experiences they know they're having. I also want to say it is technically possible, I guess, for every system who claims to have formed without trauma to be either lying or wrong in some other way, or repressing trauma. But it's not my place or anyone else's outside of a professional to determine that or otherwise question their experiences. I don't know what's going on in your head. I can't know what's going on in your head, and it's not up to me whether or not you are describing your experiences correctly. And I'm not comfortable asserting that I know more about you than you do, even if I don't have an explanation for your experience. I also think it's really important to acknowledge if religion or spirituality is involved in those experiences or identity, that could also be seen as a type of coping mechanism and a cultural thing in some ways, at least on top of that. It would, with the current definition at least, be inherently not DID or OSDD because there's a religious exception specifically built into the criteria. But it's not my place to question other people's religions generally unless they're trying to push it on me or otherwise causing harm. I also want to emphasize that people can be wrong about something without purposefully faking it. So even if there are people who are wrong about the way to accurately describe their experiences, that's not the same as lying. And I don't think it's harmful for people to use the best description they currently have of their experiences and then find better words later if it's not totally accurate. And they're still experiencing something, and this is the best way they can understand it right now. And I don't think that's harmful. I do think that faking can absolutely cause harm in any form. But also, anyone in the community can cause harm. real systems, well-meaning singlets, etc., can all cause harm. Everyone's capable of causing harm. I think the most harm we can do is if the community responds really aggressively to people or groups of people that we think are faking for whatever reason, because it drives rifts between us and can negatively impact a lot of real systems, whether or not that person or that group is faking. I believe really strongly that fake claiming will inherently cause harm, even if they're really faking. Even if it doesn't hurt the person who is faking, or if you think that person deserves it, essentially, it will hurt other people who see that, especially if it's public. So many people can see that, and there are so often people who have overlapping experiences who are not faking, who will see you fake claiming someone for that reason, and then start worrying that they're faking or wrong about their experiences too. And you can't ever know for sure if someone is faking or actually experiencing something else, or what's going on in their head. And it's not your place to try or to assume or to assert that you know what's going on. I do think having exclusive spaces in at least some circumstances makes sense. I think having spaces for more specific types of experiences can make sense, that this area is specifically also about trauma-related things, for instance, and that it's meant to be, like, for instance, a support group for that category of experience. And it could also be good for people who've had bad experiences with other groups who aren't accepted in that exclusive space. Accepted might be the wrong word. Who aren't invited into that exclusive space, and find those groups overall triggering or just aren't comfortable around them, etc. I don't think exclusive spaces should involve, like, bad mouthing or invalidating other groups of people behind their backs. I don't think that's kind or respectful generally, even if those people don't know you're doing it. And I don't think all spaces can or should be exclusive. And then generally for how we are going to do things in our space, in our community, our channel is about our experiences. Our experiences are about DID. We are a traumagenic system, but it's more specific to that because it's also about our specific system. So we are going to have at least somewhat different experiences than literally any other person, system, or otherwise. That's just how people work. So if you have some things in common with us and some things not, that makes sense. If you have nothing in common with us and you're just interested, that's also fine. People with different experiences than us are welcome, even if it's very different experiences. But I think inherently people with, like, smaller amounts of different experiences kind of have to be welcome if we want literally anyone to be here. Because again, like, people are different from each other. And fake claiming or invalidating other people's experiences isn't welcome here. We would consider that essentially to be a form of bullying, and we will moderate that in our community. So our channel and our Twitch and our Discord, our community generally, is open to anyone who follows our rules and boundaries, essentially. People who are respectful, and any type of system, as well as singlets, questioning, whoever. If you're respectful, you're welcome here. You also don't have to agree with each other, but you do have to respect each other. That's really important to us in our community. I also want to emphasize that personal theories and beliefs and assumptions are different than accusations, like personally, directly to someone you know or publicly. I think that's different. So if you personally don't believe the same things that I do, or if you personally have doubts about a specific person because of the way they talk about their experiences for whatever reason, I don't know that that's necessarily inherently bad, but I do think it's inherently harmful to say that to or about them, especially to them or in public. I also want to make the point broadly that anyone could be lying about anything, especially online, and expecting proof for everything or just the big things that really matter to you or whatever is unrealistic. It's not fair or reasonable or safe, probably in a lot of situations, to expect people to, for instance, prove that they're diagnosed or even be able to access professional diagnosis. But, like, I'm not going to tell you who my therapist is to prove that I'm diagnosed. And it's not other people aren't entitled to that level of access or information about me if I'm not comfortable sharing it. And that doesn't mean that I'm lying, essentially. I can have privacy about things in my life without it being a sign of anything else. Thank you for listening and sticking with me to the end, and in advance for being respectful to each other within this community and ideally also outside of it. And we care a lot that people feel safe and welcome here. And so I hope you do. And we will continue to focus largely on our own experience and other fun, casual things like gaming on the side. And you can check out all things below me on the screen, mostly in the description, and like and comment and subscribe, etc. And turn on notifications if you haven't, since we are not on a super predictable schedule at this point, to make sure you don't miss things. And we will see you for more things soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.